I am very privileged to introduce Przemysław Bursztyka, who is the current chair of the Department of Philosophy of Culture of the Faculty of Philosophy of the University of Warsaw. He is another person who's been really critical for our ongoing discussions. He is a past resident fellow at the AIPCT as well. His interests include philosophy of culture, including cultural studies, philosophical psychology, philosophy of human nature, especially apophatic anthropology, which we'll learn some more about, and philosophy of subjectivity, phenomenology, psychoanalysis, and existentialism and aesthetics. Currently, he's working on the aesthetic and ethical, broadly understood aspects of the work of imagination. He's the co-editor of a number of books, including the one we're currently working on, and he is our editor and fearless leader-in-chief at Eidos, a journal for philosophy of culture. So with that said, let's welcome Przemysław Bursztyka to give his paper today, an outline of an apophatic philosophy of culture.
Good afternoon or good evening, because of time difference. Thank you, Eli, for your very nice, very kind introduction. And thank you for having me on this great event. I would like to present one question. Did I have an hour, as you said yesterday?
Yes, you should have an hour and then 15 minutes for questions.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. Important information. I will try to stay within an hour. The paper is the effect. It consists of 18 pages, maybe 17, and it's an effect of very severe auto-castration of the paper, which was originally consisting of 40 pages. So I hope it will be doable in an hour. What can I say as a starting point? Perhaps one more important note. In my feeling, whatever I'm doing now in this paper, regardless whether we consider the shorter version or its longer version, prepared for the book, it's nothing more than just a tribute to my great teachers. One of those is here among us is Professor Zofia Rosińska. Another two are Professor Krzysztof Okopień, who is already elsewhere with capital E, and Professor Marek J. Siemek, who is also in the very same place. Whatever mistakes I made in this presentation is only and exclusively on me. Okay, so to start with, the first impulse of my reflection can be expressed on my ongoing reflection for many years. Is a simple question: what is philosophy of culture? And very quickly, everyone who hears this question very quickly realize that it can be somehow divided into two questions. What is culture if it is capable to emanate from itself philosophy? And what is philosophy if it originates from culture? And I'm tempted to say that those questions are so complex and so difficult that perhaps it would be better to stop here and finish my talk, except the fact that I have so many pages, so having this opportunity, I'm going to present them anyway as a form of ongoing as a form of initial results of an ongoing reflection. So all these questions, especially the question of culture, poses, but also of philosophy of culture, poses many controversies. And these controversies, when it comes to the question of culture, can be expressed in a very simplistic, to the philosophy of culture, or to culture as, or to philosophy, understood as being immersed in culture, can be expressed in a very simplistic form. These controversies expressed in a simplistic form lead us to my very initial, but at the same time crucial thesis. Philosophy of culture is not a discipline or sub-discipline among other philosophical or scientific disciplines. If by a discipline or sub-discipline, we want to understand separate field of human knowledge to which correspond a particular type of objects, philosophy of culture simply does not fit into this picture. There is no objective answer to its what. Each genuinely philosophical approach to culture has to begin as a movement of questioning culture, or to put it more precisely, as originating from culture phenomenon of cultural self-questioning. This phenomenon and this radical entanglement of culture and philosophy, of a question and its object, cannot be properly explicated within the scope of cultural sciences, simply because of the over-reductionist attitude or results. But precisely this phenomenon and this entanglement is my point of departure. The point of arrival, rather expressed in terms of wishful thinking, would be a genuinely philosophical concept of culture, if there is such a positive concept of culture. So let's start with a simple question, because this entanglement of the object and the subject, of a discipline or non-discipline and an object or non-object, already suggests a kind of circularity in posing a question about culture and about philosophy. So let's start with a simple question. What is culture? If we pose it, we already see that it aims at the essence of what is questioned, and as such it already appears as problematic. That is so, since culture is no thing, not an entity, not a product, as most of the classical definitions of culture try to convince us. Neither is it any kind of substance or trans-individual subject. Neither is it a simple sum of human productions, more or less objectified realm of material artifacts, as well as of social, legal, intellectual, spiritual, and axiological achievements. Culture is not, as would put it the author of the first famous definition of culture, Edward Barnett Taylor. So culture is not that complex whole consisting of or embracing X number of elements, of objectified elements, a whole or an aggregate which can take this or that form depending on the historical or geopolitical circumstances. To be clear, there is no doubt that all these achievements belong to culture, or to put it more adequately, they are proper to culture, in a sense of belonging to and originating from. They are its articulations, emanations, phenomenalizations. But they do not express culture as something hidden behind them, as some mysterious subject, which would have to come to itself through alienated forms of always necessarily imperfect materializations. Culture is always already there, while being immanent to them. It is not identical with them. Neither is it something separate from them. One can say that what is at play here is a constitutive tension between culture and its phenomenalizations. A tension expressed in a play of identity and difference, of fragment and presumed but ungraspable totality, of concealment and unconcealment, to use the Heideggerian idiom. In other words, what is fragmentary, partial, contingent, perspectival has essential tendency for taking place of what is fundamental, originary, objectively binding. The best example of that, of what I'm talking right now, is a critique of late Husserl and post-Husserlian phenomenologies of the relation between Lebenswelt and objective knowledge in the form of science. Culture cannot be simply reduced, as the proponents of scientific worldview would like to see it, either to a particular perspective, being more perfect, being more developed on reality or paradigm, or to a single region of these phenomenalizations. Neither can it be reduced to their sum. It escapes these identifications as well as all ultimate determinations and conceptualizations. It cannot be grasped by means of any concept. Neither has it served as a kind of general concept under which all cultural products can be subsumed, as classified and divided into particular regions of the human universe of meanings. Therefore, any attempt at decomposing culture into sections, regions, spheres, which are to be somehow, in fact, quite magically extracted and abstracted from culture, and then surprisingly stand over against it or in front of it. The practice which finds its penultimate exemplification in common phrases such as religion and culture, politics and culture, science and culture, economics and culture, and so on and so forth, seems to be fundamentally inadequate. Perhaps there is nothing wrong with these divisions, except the fact that they clearly show that those who use them have no basic understanding of the concept of culture and its complexities. The problem is that after such a consequent division, there is probably nothing left which would assure culture any positive content. If we would like to understand culture as some region of human experience, it can be divided in such a way that this region would eventually be empty. Hence, the concept of culture would be finally revealed as meaningless. One can say that there is one positive effect of all these attempts. They lead, however unintentionally, to a purification of the concept of culture. If there is no positive content which can be ascribed to it, then we have to search for its meaning on a different plane. Correlatively, culture is neither a fact nor a simple sum of facts. It always transcends by its very nature the sphere of facts, while at the same time makes them possible. Culture arises out of the creative act of distance towards all factuality, as much as it arises out of creative negation of purely sensus raw data, of pure immediacy, of factum brutum, what was expressed so aptly by Ernst Cassirer in his third volume of Phenomenology of Symbolic Forms. No being, and I quote Cassirer, no being is tangible or accessible except through meaning. But the latter is never univocal, one-dimensional. It is nothing standing by itself, as it were in a kind of void. Rather, as both Cassirer and long before him, in even more radical way, radical and I would even say more aggressive way, Nietzsche underscored, it always already takes on a metaphorical form articulated by and through the figure as, which is to say, it is comprehensible only as relational, differential, and dynamic. It always already presupposes an a priorical and highly complex context of understanding, a context within which it is always already related to something other than itself, within which it presupposes different possible actualizations of this fundamental relatedness, within which it opens reality as virtually infinite realm of possible extension of meanings, including their far-reaching transformations and reconfigurations. That is to say, the mentioned above act of creative negation and of creative distance, being always already cultural, turns all givens, regardless of their character, into meaningful forms located within a net of significant interrelations, or, as Martin Heidegger would call it, constitute them as parts of all-encompassing and ever-present and virtually ever-extensible significance. Simply put, all elements of cultural universe get their status by means of a double move, that of creative negativity and that of positive signification. This double move not only simply constitutes these elements as units, objects of possible experience or facts, it constitutes them as being, by their very nature, sent off to all other meaningful elements of cultural universe. That is to say, this act always operates and is comprehensible only within the presumed horizon of all potential acts. This horizon indicates an originary, active, creative, trans-individual and intersubjective realm, or I would even say element, of human endeavors of giving meaning to whatever is given to human experience. It is the realm or element of primordial, dynamic processes of structuration, signification, symbolization. First and for the most part taking place on the level of pre-reflective social praxis. As such, it is never one-dimensional, but rather comprises all plural and diverse meaningful frameworks. As Georg Simmel put it very aptly in his groundbreaking analysis of the phenomenon of money, there are no elements and no facts which would be limited to this static and one-dimensional meaning. Each fact belongs to different dimensions. There is no purely religious, purely economic, or purely aesthetic facts. If so, each element of culture, each, and I quote Simmel now, particular fact not only permits, actively and passively, the entire range of the intellectual world, but also manifests itself as the symbol of the essential forms of movement within this world. And our task is to uncover the possibility of finding in each of life's details the totality of its meaning. End of quote. In the presented perspective, culture has an a priorical character. It lays structural and functional foundations for what is simply given. It arranges the world we live in into a meaningful functional unity, into a dynamic structure of functional relations. In this sense, the essentialist question, what is culture, is not only misleading, but also simply inadequate. In other words, when confronted with the problem of culture, neither the category of essence nor any concept of transhistorical subject, nor a logical notion of set can help us. They should be replaced by fundamentally different categories such as a function or a dynamic structure. But I would like to propose another, following my teachers, Professor Zofia Rosińska and also Krzysztof Okopień, another even more important category, namely that of situation. And this is the category which is completely dismissed by most of the anthropological and derived from other forms of cultural sciences category. Perhaps with one exception of the school established more or less formally, rather less formally, by Clifford Geertz and his followers like Jeffrey Alexander, for example, in sociology of culture. So the category of situation. This category even more strongly presents culture as the intransgressible element of all possible experiences and all their possible objective counterparts, where none of them appears, as it were, out of nowhere, and as such cannot achieve, even though usually aspire to, the status of absolute truth or pure objectivity. The category of situation underscores the dynamic and tensive character of culture, where possibility emerges out of and stands over against facticity. Facts are essentially related to ideals. Creative innovation opposes what is already sedimented, but opposes it in the form of creative rearticulation. The real merges, or more accurately, is expressed by and through the symbolic and the imaginary. The category of situation also implies that the initial question of our reflection, what is culture, again, is of quite peculiar nature. It makes proper, or more accurately, any sense only when posed from within that realm, which is the very object of the question. In this sense, it reveals the ultimate possibility of culture, the inherent to culture possibility of self-reference, which takes on the aforementioned form of self-question. To repeat, culture is not constituted by the totality of facts, since it transcends factuality, and in doing so, it constitutes that very factuality. Facts always become what they are within the horizon of culture. It is their condition of possibility, the a priori horizon of their emergence. In this sense, the canonical distinction between facts and cultural facts is, in my opinion, of no special value. There are no non-cultural facts. What we consider or perceive as a fact is already the expression of culturally filtered effort, or rather a whole series of efforts, of giving meaning to reality, of interpreting data, which means presenting it as located in a particular categorically determined order. Each fact is already situated in the nexus of meanings, values, or more broadly, human concerns. It presumes a more or less complete, unified structure of reality, constituted within a particular conceptual and axiological framework. The latter, in turn, is eventually legitimized by a unified project of historical cultural community of subjects, a project which finds its primal articulation in collective imaginaries, symbols, archetypes, narratives, shared emotions, common practices, and last but not least, shared forms of sensitivity or sensus communis. As such, it also refers, in both positive and negative way, to other conceptual frameworks, to other theoretical and practical dimensions worked out and represented within the living historical reality of the same community. This leads me to somehow heterodoxical character of culture. Even though all factual phenomenalizations of culture are historically determined, culture as such is devoid of history. Obviously, not in a sense of, not in an oversimplistic sense of not having history, of hovering somewhere on the edge of quasi-eternity. Culture is devoid of history, since it cannot be reduced to a covered with dust collection of past achievements, ordered in more or less consistent sequences, which later find their reflection in handbooks of the history of culture. Thus, every concept of culture, presenting it in terms of a museum of historical monuments, material, intellectual, spiritual, legal, normative, etc., a heritage simply transmitted from generation to generation, misses the point. Whatever belongs or is proper to culture is proper to it only when and as undertaken in the acts of creative appropriation. In this sense, culture is a constant effort of actualization and reactualization of its inherent possibilities. It is precisely here where the previously mentioned concept of significance gets its fundamental importance. It indicates that things of culture are charged with meanings which always transcend a given set of determinations, emerging out of a particular human project. And I shortly quote Hans Blumenberg, they have valences for attention and for vital distance, end of quote. They have valences for attention and for vital distance. In this sense, they are, as called them Blumenberg, pregnant. That is, they not only resist indifference on the subjective side, but they also resist on the side of historical processes, short quote again from Blumenberg, all factors that efface, that promote diffusion. In other words, no cultural facts are simply facts. That is, as achievements, affordances, events, artifacts, and so forth, given in their purity, or whose meanings are objectively established once and for all, and then transmitted, or even, I would say that transported would be a better wording in this context, to the next generations. They are not so. Each fact is marked with its inherent pastness, with its having been. But what is of decisive importance is that it bears with it possibilities not yet realized. Each cultural phenomenon is just one among many possible actualizations of what is given. Hence, it still remains possible and calls for its further reactualizations. Each act of reactualization, always taking place within different historically determined frameworks, is not only an act of making it our own, but most importantly, it is an act of possibilizing it, of uncovering its not yet seen dimensions, of revealing its not yet actualized aspects, of articulating what was left unsaid, or even more correctly, unthought of before, of experiencing it in the light of its irreducible possibilities, regardless of its always already factual character. If culture arises out of the creative act of distance towards raw, meaningless physical reality, or purely biological determinations, it lives in acts of genuine appropriation, that is, of creative distance, towards established and time-honored cultural inventory. In other words, what is essential to culture is not preservation or conservation, but rather possibility of reformulation and reconstruction. Or, if one wishes to express it more radically, possibility of deviation. There are no absolute givens or ultimate meanings in culture. And if there is any continuity in the transmission of certain cultural contents, it is this paradoxical type of continuity based on disruption originating from an act of appropriation, that is, from creative negativity, which negates in order to reconstitute, and from positive signification, which transposes cultural contents into new horizons of meaning, and which undertakes them within new historical frameworks. It is this ever-present tension between facticity and possibility which decides about the peculiar ontological status of culture and its particular phenomenalizations, characterized by their constantly unfolding throughout history, as well as against and regardless of it, meaningful overdetermination. But the latter term, to be clear, does not mean that ever new cultural meanings or products are essentially contained in the previous forms, or, as I have already mentioned, that they are implicit in some pre-existing subject. It means that the mentioned above concept of overdetermination does not indicate any understanding of culture in terms of historical progress, of a cumulative and theological process. It simply indicates the essential plasticity of cultural phenomena. That is, their tendency for differentiation, for acquiring new dimensions, for entering into new constellations of meaning. It is because of this plasticity that cultural phenomena can, and for the most part, appear as significant, related as its particular concrete realizations to the unifying horizon, only within which they can appear as having meaning for those who experience them. And in this sense, they are expressive of the foundational motivation of culture. That is, the resistance to indifference and inertia, to everything that simply happens, and to each once and for all, as much as the resistance to nothingness of meaning, to nakedness of pure life, or to express it in the Lacanian idiom, to the brutal shock of the real. So, what in principle, in my perspective, and above all, constitutes culture, as I have already indicated while referring to the category of situation, is its essentially tensive character. For culture, before any attempt at providing its own positive account, gives itself as constituted by and constituting from and within a whole series of intransgressible tensions between arche and telos, the ground and the ultimate ground and the ultimate towards which essence and semblance, possibility and facticity nomos and physis, identity and otherness, immanence and transcendence, presence and absence. These tensions provide a kind of ontological framework out of which particular, historically and locally determined forms of culture appear. What is characteristic of these tensions is that their counterparts not only operate on the basis of their mutual relatedness, they also, from within this mutual relatedness, refer to particular experiential spaces, to given cultural universes. In other words, they are not only constitutive of these spaces and universes. These tensions are comprehensible only from within them as their productive transcendental delimitations. It is out of these tensions that any account of reality appears. It is out of them that any positive, presenting it as more or less objectified region of reality, view on culture, appears. It is on the basis of particular historical, political, social, but also theoretical, or even more primarily theoretical decisions, leading in most cases unreflectively and unconsciously to this solution of these tensions. That we are, because of those decisions, we are confronted not only with this or that understanding of culture, and as a consequence of ourselves, determined as being such and such, but also, and more importantly, as having such and such form, that is, as being dominated by this rather than any other categories. However, these decisions, with all their historical diversity, do not change anything in this originary primordial characteristic of culture, which underlie all possible cultural forms. That is, its dynamic and tensive character. Thus, if one can speak of any essence of culture, if the question what is to have any sense in here, it refers to this genetically and ontologically primordial element of productive tensions from which all other fundamental categories derive as their specifications. That is, concrete, conceptual, imagistic, theoretical articulations of these very tensions. None of them are final, none of them are ultimate. None of them are more adequate or closer to any pre-established ideal. And that is so simply because the latter, this presumed pre-established ideal, is nothing but one of such fundamental categories derived from this originary tensive element. So all of these articulations confirm fundamentally indefinite character of culture. And it is only in this sense we can provide a tentative, less than satisfactory definition of culture. Culture is nothing but an open-ended process of indefining itself. So what all of this has in common with philosophy of culture? So what kind of consequences we should derive from it, from understanding of philosophy of culture, as understood as apophatic philosophy of culture? Well, I believe in order to understand that, and I will have to be more apt and more condensed, so to speak, in order to be on time. In order to understand that, we have to realize what was the meaning of what was the significance of the very meaningful turn in the philosophical self-understanding around the mid of 20th century. namely the ultimate or the final undermining of the set of oppositions, post-Cartesian, Cartesian, post-Cartesian set of oppositions which were dominating the philosophical discourse for many decades or many centuries rather. And the first thinker who opposed them was Kant, but it took quite time for philosophy to really understand the lesson of Kant. So these oppositions like subject-object, being-thought, nature-culture, and so on and so forth, they were finally undermined. And philosophy understood that both oppositions themselves, as well as their components, or to be more exact, their concrete forms, are the effects of dynamic processes taking place in a primordial, originary realm. This realm is not only precedes all oppositions and distinctions, through and on which philosophy and other theoretically significant activities work, but is a realm of making all actualities and all meaning in the human world. That was a quote from Marek Fiam. That is culture. This historical fact has significant consequences for philosophy in general. First, philosophy, while maintaining its transfactual and a priorical character, becomes more and more aware of its own immersion in culture. It is no longer something standing over against, beyond, or above its own facticity. It is part of culture, one of its manifestations, one of its phenomenalizations. Second, philosophy, whatever form it takes, is directed towards culture. It is so either in an interpretative mode, I can skip that, towards culture. In any senses which we can ascribe to this phrase of being directed towards culture, philosophy's directedness towards culture being foundational for it. Philosophy appears as cultural activity. It can differ from other cultural activities, of course, practical, scientific, artistic, religious, ludic, etc., by a degree of conceptual sophistication, more systematic approach, or more critical attitude. But it does the same work of providing frameworks, conceptual, logical, axiological, within which humans can and do exist. It is a cultural activity among other cultural activities, whose task is to conceptualize, interpret, and enlighten our forms of living and knowing. Therefore, Zofia Rosińska rightly distinguishes implicit and explicit philosophy of culture. While the latter is self-aware philosophical reflection on the universe of cultural meanings, the former is identical with these very meanings, that is implicit philosophy of culture, with these very meanings as they are present and operative in our everyday lives. That is before any philosophical theorization and conceptualization. And as such, they present either spontaneous, immediate, pragmatic, or essentially non-speculative, preconceptual, for example, artistic or mythical responses to the very same questions philosophy poses. Well, in the light of what was stated above, it would not be surprising that philosophy of culture appears as hardly definable. Thus, instead of providing any definition, I would like to make a few points which can help us to understand what role philosophy of culture does and should play, as well as to explore its nature and status. So first, philosophy of culture is philosophy, which is to say, philosophy as such is philosophy of culture. This provocative equation derives from the correct interpretation of the copula of, present in the name of the object of our interest here. There is no doubt that the phrase philosophy of culture is a genitive case. The thing is that it should be read as genitivus subjectivus, as again Krzysztof Okopień claimed. To read philosophy of culture as genitivus subjectivus means to understand two basic points about the interrelation between philosophy and culture. First, philosophy is always and without exception philosophy of culture. Second, philosophy as such originates from and belongs to culture as its ultimate possibility of understanding. In this sense, philosophy of culture reveals, in a sense, the ultimate truth of philosophy as such. So, philosophy of culture is not one among many other philosophical subdisciplines. Rather, it is philosophy in its totality. It is philosophy as such. What decides about its character is its particular approach to reality, seen at one and the same time as the effect and the origin of all forms, including philosophy itself, of giving meaning to what is simply given. It is open and sensitive to the irreducible plurality and inherent diversity of these meaning effects. But most importantly, it relentlessly strives to reveal and maintain the tensive character of its origin and its only object, which is culture. As a consequence, it lacks any distinctive object or field of its cognitive interest. It refers to whole of reality as being that very realm of permanent human self-actualization, expressed in projecting ever new constellations of meanings, ever new forms of self-understanding, ever new discursive, poetic, imaginative, practical, and existential spaces, which by their very nature deviate from everything which is simply established and time-honored. Second, it is philosophy of human affairs, and here I follow Professor Zofia Rosińska. Philosophy of human affairs. It presents and analyzes culture as the realm of possible human experiences, actions, and workings, but it does so from within the apophatic attitude. The latter asserts the existence of a peculiar entity commonly referred to as the human being, but at the same time opposes any metaphysical or speculative accounts trying to grasp the essence of that being in abstracto, by extracting her from the realm of existence, from the sphere of experiences, activities, concerns, motivations, purposes, and works. So, apophatic attitude refuses such a step. Even within the latter, within this realm of activities, concerns, experiences, purposes, and so on and so forth, human being is never given to him herself in the form of direct and immediate self-presence, but rather as a constant interplay of presence and absence, identity and otherness, of creative participation and alienation in his/her own workings. To put it differently, the human being is not so much an entity or substance which can be grasped and conceptualized. It is rather a name for a peculiar space of in-between, the space in which the tensions constituting culture can become visible. However, since these tensions, as I have mentioned, are subject to a particular forms of dissolution, which decides about such and such understanding of culture and of ourselves, then humans are given to themselves also by means of and through concrete delimitations, That means they are given to themselves on the basis of historically determined and theoretically conceptualized models of self-understanding. Hence, philosophy of culture, understood as an apophatic philosophy, apophatic anthropology, is to be first a genealogical and archaeological analysis of these models of self-understanding. Second, a phenomenological hermeneutics, which trying to grasp the human being can do it only by choosing an indirect route. That means it has to be an interpretative, open-ended analysis of all symbolic and imaginary, artistic and technological, ideal and material, theoretical and ludic traces of that peculiar entity. The entity which is nothing in itself, the entity which in its essence is nothing but possibility of being. Third, philosophy of culture has an a priorical character. It tries to uncover and or project the most general conceptual frameworks underlying different forms of human experience. In this sense, it is transfactual. It transcends the sphere of facts as being oriented towards the non-empirical foundation, that is either to arche, the ultimate ground, or to telos, the ultimate towards which. And here I follow both Professor Rośniewska and Professor Okopik. But it is minimalistic in its apodictic a priorical aspirations. That means this fundamental reference to the a priorical foundation is immersed in and emerges out of this sphere, and as such is itself founded in the phenomenological ontology of human being. Reference to that foundational a priori always already indicates reference back to the human factical situation. There is an essential circularity and mutual relatedness between these two spheres. And it is from this circularity and on the basis of this relatedness that any tentatively positive accounts of both counterparts can only appear. And it is in this sense that the relation itself ontologically precedes its counterparts. Fourth, philosophy of culture is historical. Likewise, culture, and in precisely the same sense, philosophy of culture has no history. And yet, it is, as all cultural phenomena, historically determined. It is, so to speak, immersed in history. As originating from and being directed towards culture, philosophy, as philosophy of culture, is always shaped by the same fundamental questions and concerns, and possible responses to them, which, although for the most part have a transhistorical, if not universal character, nevertheless are always given as their reactualizations and rearticulations, arising out and created within particular, historically determined community of subjects. In this way, philosophy of culture, far from any relativization, takes on a form which is expressive of and interpretatively directed towards these rearticulations. That is to say, it initiates a vital and productive dialogue between any given universe of meanings and what was handed down to it in the form of historical traces. That is, interpreting them in the light of the same fundamental questions and concerns. And to understand cultural phenomena in terms of questions means, as put it very aptly Hans-Georg Gadamer, to be open to possibilities and to keep them open. In this sense, philosophy of culture is to be a relentless and open-ended reflection on human historicity, on how human forms of self-experience are historically determined. But philosophy of culture in its historical character is not to be limited to this interpretative work, as originating from and being immersed in culture. Its ongoing task is also to critique always already culturally available categories and concepts, and project from within that very immersion new categories and concepts by means of which humans can make sense of historical reality, especially in its transitional moments. Fifth, as is clear from what was stated above, philosophy of culture is to play a vital cultural role in providing, to express it in a metaphorical way, a holistic, conceptual and existential map, a set of basic coordinates which would help us to orient ourselves in the whole myriad of cultural meanings. So philosophy is not to be distantiated towards other cultural articulations, but entering into creative dialogue, but it should enter into creative dialogue with them and try to provide, by means of that, try to provide a synoptic picture of culture. As Georg Simmel put it, one of the main tasks of its relation to the sciences, one of the main tasks of philosophy in its relation to the sciences begins where, and I start quote, the ever fragmentary contents of positive knowledge seek to be augmented by definitive concepts into a word picture and to be related to the totality of life, and also relate them to values. And again, a short quote from Simmel, the most general relations of intellectual life. Okay, let's skip it in order to be more or less on time. Well, of course, I think we can skip it. Sixth, philosophy of culture is philosophy, understood as philosophy of culture. And here I follow Marek Przemek, Polish philosopher, one of my teachers, takes on, starting from the mid of 20th century, takes on exclusively the form of epistemology. But the latter is not to be identified here with the traditional philosophical subdiscipline concerned with the problem of human cognition, simply speaking, theory of cognition. Here it has a different meaning. It is a critical analysis, or yes, it is a critical analysis of the process of origination or creation of different episteme, where episteme means an operating on the natural, linear level, comprehensive, immediate form of human knowledge of the world, a particular form of cognitive and practical assimilation of reality by the human being in his/her acts of understanding. The last sentence was a quote from Przemek. A particular form of cognitive and practical assimilation of reality by the human being in his/her acts of understanding. And every episteme as such remains on the epistemic level, but at the same time is always already situated within the pre-epistemic, that is epistemological horizon of possible self-understanding. Philosophy as philosophy of culture is nothing but the activity of projection or uncovering of such a horizon. In this sense, it uncovers a genuine character, short quote from Przemek, and meaning of different forms of epistemic experience. In other words, it does not work as one of them or from within any of them. Rather, it tries to analyze them as specific possible concretizations of the broader context of their primordial element, in which processes of creating different episteme take place. That is to say, it is no longer interested only in what particular episteme articulate, but first and foremost in what lies beyond their sight, that is, in the modes of those articulations, more in their how than in their what. Thus, philosophy is by its nature an analysis of these forms, their origination, importance, legitimization, and modes of their existence. Another short quote from Przemek. In this sense, it is a real ontology of epistemic forms of human experience. Its task is to analyze all these configurations, objectivities, to trace their genesis, to analyze their conditions of possibility, and to recognize in them different moments and plural forms of the same relentless and creative processes of meaning-giving. In this sense, philosophy is first and foremost a critique of culture. It is an ongoing hermeneutics of different forms of cultural experience. It is genealogy and archaeology of different forms of knowledge and its corresponding objectivities. As such, philosophy as philosophy of culture, being epistemology, is at the same time a form of phenomenological ontology. It is concerned with ontological structure and forms of existence of these culturally articulated actualities in different modi of their giveness in human experience. All that means culture precedes logically and genetically all possible episteme, which are to articulate it. Culture precedes and determines all forms of experience, including scientific experience, and all their corresponding objects. And in this sense, it gives them intrinsically cultural character. Okay, I think I need 3-4 more minutes. Is it possible?
Yes, I think so. That will give us, 10 minutes for questions and still some time for a break. So that should work.
Okay. So 7th, philosophy of culture is first philosophy. This thesis does not mean evocation of the end of metaphysics or any form of its dismissal. It means that since the rise of philosophy of culture, methodologically self-aware philosophy of culture, metaphysics can only be seen as metaphysics of culture, in the sense of genitivus subjectivus. As a consequence, even the most basic and fundamental metaphysical concepts, for example, being or substance, appear to be cultural projections, whose meaning is given within the frameworks of historically determined phenomenological ontology. That means they no longer indicate in a naive, straightforward way being in itself, being in its purity, but only and exclusively as it is given to us in a concrete form of experiential apprehension. Being it practical, technological, scientific, philosophical, religious, poetic, theological, artistic, and so on and so forth. Experiential apprehension taking place always within a particular horizon of meaning. If so, then it seems that the only legitimate form of metaphysics is the metaphysics of trace. All this leads us to the third point. Philosophy of culture as first philosophy is, as it was already indicated, projective or constructivist in its nature. And it is so in a few senses. As culture's self-questioning, its reflective moment, it is at once interpretative and projective. As interpretative, it is to be an ongoing analysis of always already available concepts and categories. It is to be a relentless testing of their limitations, relevance and validity. That is, testing to what extent they are capable of giving justice to our experience of reality and of ourselves. As projective, it is to construct and project new meanings on those concepts and categories, to uncover their unthought of or forgotten aspects and new semantic dimensions, to project them onto different semantic fields, leading in this way to the enrichment, not only, excuse me, of cultural discourse, but also, and more importantly, of our sense of reality and of ourselves. Furthermore, as culture's reflective moment, it is also to project new concepts by means of which the world we live in can not only be more or again significant, but also experientially broadened. In this sense, philosophy of culture is based on the twofold motivation. That of possibilization, which is to maintain dynamic and creative and irreducible character of culture, and to resist any standardization of cultural meanings, and that of pluralization, which is to maintain vital ambiguity, indefiniteness, and equivocality of culture, or polyphonic character of culture, and to resist all tendencies to level it down to any system of univocal meanings, to one-sided form of objectivity. So, as was stated several times, or at least 2 or 3, philosophy as philosophy of culture originates from culture as its ultimate possibility of self-critique and self-question. To put it more radically, perhaps it is nothing more than that. If so, then its most serious duty is to relentlessly uncover the dynamic, transfactual, and tensive character of culture. It is to reach beneath or beyond the realm of what we commonly and naively call facts. It is to interpretatively go through all available ready-made concepts, categories, images, which are considered as rendering objectively the world we live in. Philosophy, as philosophy of culture, is not about facts. It is about possibilities. It is not about reality. It is about what reality can or ought to be. It is not about justifying concepts. It is about questioning and projecting them. In this sense, there is an ethical demand essentially inscribed into philosophy of culture, to work as a relentless resistance towards all forms of cultural inertia, standardization, unquestioned dominance of particular worldviews, vocabularies, paradigms, and it is an ever-present risk, as we all know quite well. Well, there is much more to be said here, but obviously I already extended the time generously given to me. So thank you very much for listening, and I suppose we are to open the discussion.
Yes. Thank you. Give a round of applause, like a silent round of applause in our mysterious background here. Let's open up for questions. Przemysław, I'll let you, since you know how to do the waved hand technology, I'll let you take them. We have about 10 minutes. I'll just keep us on track timing-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it looks like Mark has one. I cut this quickly.
Yes, you said there were, thank you for a lovely talk. You said there were no non-cultural facts. Would you say there are pan-cultural facts? And if there are, what relation do they stand in with regard to cultural facts?
So your question is about did I get it correctly? Your question is about whether I do assume that there is a possibility of thinking about non-cultural facts.
Are there pan-cultural facts?
Pan-cultural facts.
Yes.
And what would be the meaning of pan-cultural facts? I didn't get it.
Facts which are not non-cultural, but in some sense combine in a possibly devaluative sense multiple cultures. They come in some sense, they're grounded in multiple cultures. For example, some current technological, well, American culture in some sense has become is sort of as a pan-cultural dimension and being adopted and combining with other cultures. And there's something to be said, you know, the internet culture, social media, and there's a pan-cultural fact.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that, especially in our times, what you call the pan-cultural facts, or what most probably is already called in the literature as pan-cultural facts, is something with which it is difficult to discuss. However, I would still underscore that there is some kind of creative appropriation even here when we consider, for example, can we consider the simple cultural phenomenon like McDonald's restaurant? Can we consider it as a pan-cultural fact?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, I do believe we can. And when you consider what is the status of McDonald's restaurant in the US, I had a chance several times to observe it. When you compare this status in the US with the status in Poland, for example, where the whole families on Sundays go for a family dinner there, you will see what I mean here by creative appropriation. So it is never a pure objective transportation, so to speak, of this fact. It is already situated in a completely different cultural context. Obviously, in the very same period of time, I do believe that this moment, this aspect of creative appropriation is much more radical in case of those contents which are transported from us from different periods, different epochs of time. But even within the same time frameworks, I do believe that there is never something which is simply given, even with such simple phenomena like McDonald's restaurant.
I want to cut in here and change Mark's question just a little bit. I mean, Przemysław and I have had the McDonald's argument or discussion any number of times as he was trying to convince me that in Poland, it's actually a good thing to eat at McDonald's.
No, I never say so. I say that many families go there too, and I always find myself in despair by observing this.
Yeah, well,
this is a fact.
It is.
Families go there after church for a family dinner.
Well, it's awful. But let me change Mark's question just a little bit, because if you look at what happens in Hellenism, the spread of sort of the Greek way of living and Greek way of seeing the world and all of that, and you begin to realize that one of the things that Alexander did, and then many other emperors thereafter copied it, he wouldn't bother to tear down an old city. He would just build a new city next to it, and all the roads went there, and all the trade went there, and all of the sparkly new stuff went there. And if you understand the history of Jerusalem, for example, you understand one of the worst arguments they ever had was whether to tear down the temple and put a sports stadium there. I mean, that argument in Jerusalem went on for 200 years, and it was bloody because there were people who, under Hellenism, wanted to tear down the temple and put a sports stadium there because that's what the Greeks would do. And so my question would be, so let's say that that had turned out differently than it did, and the Jews of that time period had torn down the temple and put up a sports stadium. Would they have then had Jewish sports? Do you think? Is that what you're saying? I mean, it's like they would sell, you know, I don't know, kosher things at the stadium, you know, instead of what the Greeks would eat. And I mean, is that what you mean by the appropriation?
Obviously, the example you gave is quite telling, and I would even say extreme. And most of our many of our reactions, or our most immediate reaction, is a kind of I would even say negative in such cases. Yeah. But this is how culture operates. This is how culture operates. I do not see culture when we simply preserve, when we simply take care of something which is no longer telling for us. It is no longer culture.
I get it. I think that's a really good answer.
Other questions?
In your opinion, sorry.
No. Maybe Marcin and then Pino, and then we'll use those to close out.
So my point is very short and related to Mark's previous question. So when you say there are no cultural facts, what would you say about the facts that we know about, that they have occurred long before any culture existed? I mean, how about the cultural nature of facts from the prehistoric times? How can you call these cultural facts? Or that's it.
Did I understand correctly? Because the quality of connection, I'm not really happy with the quality of connection. You are asking about the circle?
I mean, you said that there were no...
Yeah, I know, but you gave some particular example. What was your example?
What is the cultural character of the facts that have taken place even before any kind of culture existed? I mean, facts from the times of dinosaurs, from the time...
I see. Well, my only answer is, Marcin, I think I know, and I'm not really surprised because we are good friends and we work in the same departments. I know this is inspired by speculative realism, this question, and this is one of my problems with this idea of how it is called in the idea of trying to analyze the times before us in speculative realism. How do you call it?
Well, there is that term archifossil.
Exactly. So here's my point. Probably my mind is too phenomenologically oriented in all possible forms of understanding the word phenomenology, and here's my point. I just explained what would be the ground of that answer, and my point is that yes, this is something interesting. This is something important. This is something inspiring and enriching our culture. But the thing is, I mean, those investigations about the facts, concerning the facts before culture. But the thing is that we always attempt in these investigations from within our cultural frameworks. So we are trying to describe what was before culture, but by using cultural categories, cultural forms of argumentation, scientific hypotheses, and so on and so forth. So I do not believe in the immediate access to those data to which you refer, to those facts. Fact is something already elaborated by culture.
All right. So, but well, one could ask if that whether that verges towards some sort of idealism, right? Because one of the consequences could say that there were nothing prior to culture. Right, if everything is cultural, so we could sort of only retroactively consider something a fact. So this is actually the point of my question. How?
Well, I would thank you, Marcin, for this question, because I see this tension in my perspective, the tension between idealism and realism. And I would answer, my answer would be similar to the answer to this reproach, to the very same reproach as in case of Martin Heidegger. So his claim was that the Earth existed before human being, but the world didn't exist before human being, and will disappear without human being, without design.
Okay.
So my point is that by developing this point, Heidegger's point, trying to develop this Heidegger's point, I would say that I do not undermine the existence of Earth. There is Earth, there is reality. But the thing is that, as I said in the point concerning philosophy as a first philosophy, we have access to this reality only through the categories and concepts and processes of elaborating data, which are available and created and elaborated and available in culture. So in this sense, if it is idealism, it is kind of, I would say, phenomenological transcendental idealism, which does not undermine neither metaphysical categories nor cosmological nor biological categories, but simply strongly accentuates the value and the importance, the fundamental importance of how they appear and can be translated into the field of our trans-individual experience.
There is yet another thing I'd like to talk to you, but probably now it's not the time because
we are. Unfortunately, I want to give us 3 minutes to take a very brief restroom break. Pino, I'm sorry I didn't get to your question, but I can.
My question is very simple. In your opinion, which is the difference between experience and the culture? I want to mean that I think that your interesting lecture analyzes the experience similar to the culture, or the culture is something that can give a particularity to experience. And in this context, which is the relation between thought, emotion, action, and the product of this intentionality? Because the real problem, I think, is to understand this relation between individual and environment. In your conception of the culture, what is the meaning? Yes, it could be phenomenological, but what is the meaning of this relation, is complex relation? I don't know if I was clear, okay?
The relation between experience and culture?
Yes.
Okay, I do believe that I can answer very briefly. If not, we can then continue perhaps after the last lecture by Professor Macrel, or we can make some email exchange to develop this. Well, basically, I do believe that every particular experience is culturally mediated, appears from within the cultural context, and we cannot transcend this context, this horizon. However, there are some extreme, some radical experiences, or rather some limit experiences, like, for example, encounter with the radical otherness, which are marking, let's say, exactly the boundaries of culture. Those are the moments in which we have this profound feeling that we are out of ourselves, out of place. And for time being, for shorter or longer period of time, we cannot find a proper way to cope with this situation. The culture does not support us with proper instruments. So we, in most cases, we have a tendency in such situations to withdraw into the ready-made schemes, but they does not fit. So either we lose richness of the possible experience, limit experience, by withdrawing very quickly into cultural horizon, or we stayed within this limit experience for a longer time, given ourselves opportunity to broaden the scope of our understanding of reality. But this is difficult experience. Every limit experience is something which requires a lot of effort on our side, on each level of our very being. So I'm not sure whether this would be satisfactory answer as a brief answer to your question.
Yes, no, it's a very complex question, but I'm satisfied. Probably, I hope to discuss about this problem. It's very complicated. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, for sure, have future conversations. I need to move into our next speaker now, but I want to thank again Professor Bursztyka for his paper. Give our silent round of applause from the distance here.